Recognized, Uncle Walker, D01. Recognized, Orc Lord, D22.
Today in the cave, we have the host of the Plus One Forward comic strip AP and Gauntlet Podcasts, Rich Rogers. Rich is as close as you can get to a professional game master, having run over 150 game sessions so far this year. I am not sure whether I should be jealous or concerned. He is an expert on systems like Masks that use the Apocalypse engine, and he also happens to be a Young Justice fan. Rich, thanks so much for joining us in the cave.
I am so excited to be on Whelmed. It's one of my absolute favorite podcasts.
Don't embarrass me.
It's the truth.
We'll get into that in a minute, mister. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that our discussion episodes draw on anything and everything related to Young Justice, including both seasons of the series so far, the comics, and the video game. If you have not seen, read, or played all the material and are spoiler wary, consider this your warning. And with all that, let's dive in. So, you and I first met in person like just a few weeks ago at Gen Con. But I was pointed to your podcast by a colleague of mine who knew that I was developing an interest in games like Masks and am now developing Descent into Midnight, which is another Powered by the Apocalypse game. It is a fantastic show, Plus One Forward. Sound quality is excellent. The format is tight. It is incredibly informative and entertaining. I am not sure what more you want in a show.
Thank you.
Outside of that, though, we haven't had much time to chat. I don't know that much about you, so I touched on a few things in the intro, but tell us a little more about you and what you do.
Well, I've been in RPG podcasts since about 2007. I was part of a show started called The Cannon Puncture Show, and I was in that. It was nominated for a Diana Jones Award way back in the day. And that was with a number of hosts where we just talked about different RPG topics, and then that kind of pod faded. And then a couple years ago, I jumped onto the Gauntlet network, and that's a community that started off in Houston. So as we're recording, very worried about all the folks that are dealing with the fallout from that.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. And it was an actual physical gaming community that then, when one of the major organizers, Jason Cordova, had to move out of town, he started going to Hangouts, and I jumped right in there. And he invited me to be on the podcast, and now I'm a GM that's running games over Hangouts, a couple of games every week for the Gauntlet community. And I'm currently co-organizing a patron-sponsored convention that I'm lucky enough to have you on as one of our guests, Rich Howard.
Yes, thanks for inviting me on. I'm excited to play.
I cannot wait to see you fire off this Edge of the Empire game that you're going to be running. It sounds so cool.
Thanks.
Other than that, there's Comic Strip AP, which is a short form AP podcast, one player, one GM. Every episode is about 15 minutes, and it's done in an anthology style. So we have several series of games that are going simultaneously, some weird and more experimental games and games that you may have heard of. And there are a few Powered by the Apocalypse games, which is what powers Masks and the upcoming game that you're working on.
Right.
And then Gauntlet is it's a mixed format show where we have interviews with people who work within the hobby and create games. And then we also talk about the Games Roundup. That's the thing that I host, where we just sit down and we talk about the games that we're playing, what we enjoy about them, and sometimes you can see little pocket reviews where we'll talk about a particular game that we just picked up and had a chance to kick the tires on it.
Nice. So when did you first see Young Justice? Were you an original watcher? Did you pick it up on DVDs? Were you one of the Netflix crew?
I am OG. I was a Young Justice fan when it came out. I watched it every chance that I got to. It was frustrating because it was like watching Babylon 5. Like, when is the episode coming on? Okay.
Yeah.
It's on.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah.
And that was you can watch anything anywhere days. So you really had to hunt it down. And very sad when after second season, it kind of disappeared. And as soon as it came to Netflix, just gobbled it up over and over and showed it to my son recently. He's 11 and we've enjoyed the heck out of watching YJ together.
Yeah, nice target age for that as well. My kids have watched bits and pieces of it, but they're much younger, and they they love Kid Flash.
Yeah.
Because he runs fast like them. That's what they say. He runs fast like me. I'm like, yes, he does learn fast like you. And Jason Spizak was sweet enough to actually voice them a message in Kid Flash's voice when he came on the show.
Oh man, that is the coolest.
My son was way too young, but my daughter was old enough to be like, "What's happening right now? I think this cartoon character is talking to me." It was pretty great. She's like, "I want to be there when you talk to Kid Flash." I was like, "Oh no, I got to explain what's happening here. The differences between
don't break
voice actors."
man.
So you were a Young Justice fan from right off the bat, but I was there too, and I have to tell you, man, clearly I am a DC Comics fan. And I had a hard time tracking it down. I heard about it at Comic-Con one year, the year before it aired, and then literally stumbled on it in November when they aired the first 2 episodes together. And then it didn't air again until months later, like the regular show or something. They had this like premiere thing going on. And I bought it on iTunes digitally because we were out of the cable kind of trap by that time. So it was still frustrating. But like as soon as an episode came out, I would get a notification that there was a new episode and I could watch it. But it was, all of the delays and the hiatuses and all this stuff is so frustrating. So what was your experience with DC or comics in general before Young Justice came out that made you want to watch the show?
Interestingly enough, a lot of my comics fandom was Marvel and Image, mostly through a friend in college who just he had long boxes of plenty. But I stumbled onto the Young Justice when Peter David was writing it back in 98 to 2000.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm old, so if you do the math, I was in college a long time ago. And I had a chance to read Young Justice then when Peter David was right. And it was a funny book. It was great fun. It was good teen drama, but Peter David is an excellent writer. So great
really
at comedic
is.
timing. And I fell in love with Robin and Superboy and Kid Flash at that time. Those were kind of the 3 core members of the comic. And so when I found out about Young Justice, the series coming out, I was really interested in jumping in. So it wasn't easy. I wasn't smart enough to go with iTunes, but but I caught it. I caught it when I could.
Nice. Did you read the Titans before that, or did you know anything about the Titans, or was actually the Young Justice comic pre-show your introduction? Sounds like that's what happened.
Yeah, the Young Justice comic was the first.
Wow,
I really
cool.
didn't know terribly much about the Titans. I mean, superficially, right?
Yeah.
But Young Justice was the only comic, and I would say I probably only read maybe 10 issues of that. I think around the time when Spoiler came onto the team was about the last set of issues that my buddy had. So
Gotcha. So just as an aside question here, were you one of the people who at the beginning, until we found out that this Robin was Dick Grayson, did you think it was Tim Drake as well? Because there's a lot of people who thought the original Robin, or thought the Robin in the first episode was Tim, understandably, but
I thought it was Tim based on the kind of timeline that was when it was going on and my kind of mindset coming from the comics. I did think it was Tim.
Yeah, it made sense. I mean, he was a computer hacker, and he had the costume of Tim instead of the costume of Dick from back in the day, that kind of thing. So, yeah, interesting. Let's talking superheroes. Let's talk about origin stories here. What is your origin story as a gamer?
Wow. Okay. Well, on this theme of Rich being old, not you, Rich, me, Rich. I was in an advanced studies program in 3rd grade when the Dungeon board game came out.
Nice.
And Ms. McDavid said, here, we're going to try this new board game, but it has a little bit of fantasy elements. And this was before Satanic Panic, so we didn't know that we were polluting our minds.
Oh, sure, right.
Played the board game, and I was just blown away. So I ended up getting the red box, the D&D basic red box, Mincer's red box for Dungeons & Dragons, which was the basic set. And I pulled it out and I made a character. I remember lying on the carpet, my floor in my bedroom, just scribbling out my character. And I played through the little one-person adventure that was in the back of the player's handbook.
Kind of the choose-your-own-adventure game thing.
Exactly. And you have to roll dice a little bit after I crayoned in all of the cool blue dice. Still have my D4.
Nice. Yes, I'm sorry. We have to visit that for a second. So for those of you who don't know, first of all, Dungeons, because we have a lot of listeners who have never played role-playing games before, and I think Masks was an introduction. Our Masks AP was an introduction for a lot of people. So Dungeons and Dragons uses polyhedral dice. So there's like a 20-sided die and an 8-sided die and a 12-sided die and a regular 6-sided die that most people think of as dice. But way back in the day, you couldn't get those anywhere. They were plastic form molded dice that didn't even have color on them. They had little indentations where the numbers were, and the sets came with a crayon that you had to like rub the crayon into the divots for the numbers, and then I still have mine, and they're so worn, like all the corners are all rounded, and not the whatever that company is that does those crazy precision.
Oh, the game science dice.
Science dice that are all like friggin' engineered, right? Right. So it was a whole different world back then. That's so funny. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I went through the little one person play by yourself game. I got killed by a carrion crawler, which is this basically like a giant centipede type thing.
Right.
And then I was hooked. I didn't have a gaming group because I was from a small town. So it went all the way from grade school to like when I skipped my senior year of high school to go to college before I actually got to play with other living people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
so
it was
interesting.
A huge drought of just pent up desire. So the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon and all the action figures for the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, like that fed me as I just waited to spring on someone. I play games too. Let's do it. And
nice.
I haven't looked back since.
Well, thank you to your, what was it, third grade teacher?
Yes, Mrs. McDavid.
Thank you, Mrs. McDavid.
The font from which all of this comes.
So why games that are powered by the apocalypse? I'm going to make an assumption that at least our listeners know what that means. If you don't know what we're talking about specifically, you should go listen to our introductory episode before the Masks AP, where we talked to Brendan Conway a little bit about what Powered by the Apocalypse means and that kind of stuff. But so we don't rehash any of that, I'm going to assume you guys have heard that game, and we'll go from there. So why the transition to Powered by the Apocalypse games? And for that matter, how did +1 Forward come about?
Oh, great question. So Powered by the Apocalypse, that transition happened... I would say about 11 years ago, I started playing indie games, small press stuff, things that were designed by one or two folks, things that tried to be more experimental in what an RPG was. Because Dungeons & Dragons is a great game. I have played many sessions of D&D and had a great time.
Yes.
But as an adult with a kid and a job, those long campaigns just did not work as well for me. Scheduling with a gaming group was challenging. And so I was looking for games that are quicker to the table, that don't need as much setup, that people can drop in and drop out and play, and are designed less for discrete task resolution and something that's broader so that we can speed through. We can talk in funny voices, like that's my favorite part of RPGs, is talk in funny voices and resolve things on a quicker basis so that we're not spending an hour out of every game session kind of carving it out for combat. And so PbtA sits really well within that space. It's really about character relationships, and it's about a conversation, and that's one of the tenets of Apocalypse World, which was the first one, is that gaming is a conversation, and that style of gaming really appeals to me. And I have been playing it for a while, and being part of the Gauntlet, where as a community, is all adults and we're playing online and it's drop in, drop out play. I found that I was running a whole lot of PbtA stuff, from Masks to Monster Hearts to Apocalypse World to Dungeon World. And the Gauntlet community, we had a main podcast, and then we had a Dungeon World themed podcast called Discern Realities. They were both really well. Yeah. And I said, I would like to do something that's broader around all of the PbtA styles of games. And I also wanted to be able to show people all of the cool iterations, the different things that you can do with Powered by the Apocalypse mechanics and that style of role-playing games. So every episode of the first season is a different PbtA game, and I bring on the person who helped design it, or the main person who designed it. We talk for a bit. They talk about their game, and I'll ask a few pointed questions to learn the mechanics, and then they run a demo for me. So you get a little bit of like a taste of it, which is something I love about going to Gen Con, is you have an opportunity to just kind of drop in and say, well, how does this game go? And you can do it in, 12 to 15 minutes. You get a real feel, like, is this good for me or not? So I've cost myself a lot of money with a Plus One Forward podcast. As I fall in love with all of these games, and I'm like, okay, I totally have to own that too. All right, I'm gonna go
I blame you for having spent some extra money myself, actually. Yeah, I picked up Threadbare pretty much as soon as the episode was done. I'm not convinced the episode was finished. I think as you guys were doing your demo, I was online and picking up a copy of Threadbare, which is Stitch Punk. Is that what she called it?
That's what she calls it, Stitch Punk, and that's such a great game. Stephanie did such an excellent job with Threadbare. I love my book.
Yeah, it's a game where you play toys. It's basically like the Island of Misfit Toys, the role-playing game, if it's set in like Mad Max or something. It's just really like,
gotta have
right?
the Mad Max in there. Yes, it has rules for hacking on things to your little toy. Like, I'm gonna bolt on this thing, and I just love it.
Right. Or like Toy Story, where all the kids in Sid's room, all the toys in Sid's room were all like,
oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah, crazy. Oh man, such an interesting, and I agree with you. One of the things that I've enjoyed about the PbtA style of games, or powered games, PbtA powered? No, that's redundant.
Apocalypse Engine games?
Apocalypse Engine games. There we go. I'll figure it out. That's why I have you on the show, to give me more language. Is that they really do focus a lot on character interaction, character-driven drama, and like in our Masks game, the superpowers were fun. We had plenty of action. We had plenty of, real superhero-y stuff, but the drama was really pushed, like in Young Justice, is not really pushed by can you do something, but what are the consequences of the thing that you just did? And
Absolutely.
how can you work together as a team, which I'm a big fan of. I think, D&D back in the day, that's what it was. You were supposed to be a squad, a team that worked together, but the mechanics didn't really feed that. So you always had that thief who was always messing with the paladin and stealing stuff from him. And, there was all and that is a kind of game that's perfectly fun for a lot of people. I wanted the heroic games where we all worked together and had drama and character, drama in between, and not player drama, hopefully, but character drama. And pushed a good story forward, and it's interesting. I feel like I slept through about 10 years of game development. So I've been playing for 40 years since I was 7, which will tell you how old I am.
Wow. Nice.
So I've been playing since 1977, 78, and I've been playing D&D, the Hero System Champions, and I played a bunch of the old school stuff back in the day. But then I traveled a lot and did a bunch of other stuff, and so I did basically 3rd edition D&D for a very, very long time. And I was out of the loop and not really developing until about 5 or 6 years ago. Once I came back into the industry, I realized, I don't know, there was like a time jump, and now there were all these mechanics that were speaking to inter-party and inter-character interactions, and things that were in Champions and D&D, you had to bring the role-playing to the table. In a game like, Masks or Headspace or any of these other, kind of games, the mechanics actually were part of it and fed into that interaction and helped you take what could be a silly game, and because the mechanics kind of send you in a particular direction, your game becomes more of what I wanted it to be. I was incredibly impressed. Or other games like 14 Days, which is a 2-player game, which is a role-playing game that simulates living with chronic pain for 2 weeks, to let you know how to empathically connect to people who live with this chronic pain and what their life might want to be like. Come on. That's amazing, right? Like, creating this empathic link through game mechanics is absolutely fascinating to me.
Yeah, what I love about the games that we have access to now is that before, when, say, I ran a Vampire the Masquerade game during college for about 7 years, and it was super fun. But some of the conversations we'd have after game would be, it was a really good night of role playing. I got to play my character. We didn't touch the dice, right? That was a thing, right? The dice would get in the way of playing your character.
Right.
But in games that were powered by the apocalypse, you want the game to mediate that, to put at risk some of those relationships, because there are sometimes unwelcome results that will happen that will surprise you.
Yeah.
And cause these plot twists that, if everybody's just going along and kind of freeform storytelling, we all know where we're going, right? But if you put PbtA in your way, and you have to make a hard choice, right? You roll 2d6, and sometimes you've got 3 things that you want, and you only get 2 of them.
Yeah.
That choice can pivot an entire game or an entire way that you see your character. And I love that. I love that about the games.
In our mask game, I think of the very end where Emily was playing Miss Martian, and she rolled. Yeah, crazy, right? God, what was she rolling? Oh, she was rolling a Take a Powerful Blow when she first saw her white Martian brother. And she took a powerful blow, and she rolled like a 14 or something outrageous, 12 or something. Oh. And Brendan was cracking up, and he's giving her the list. Okay, you can take 2 from the 7 to 9 list, or blah blah blah, or you could lose control of your powers. And all of us were like, "Yes, lose control of your powers. Yes, we're all gonna die up here in orbit, but it's gonna be so good, And that. The dice roll fed into that in a good, positive storytelling way, right? You don't want the dice to stop a good story. You want it to feed the story.
Right.
So
exactly. And the GM is told in this game, you're a fan of the characters. That's one of your principles, right? And so instead of you fail, a bad thing happens, you, the player, feel bad, like I let the team down. There are so many different ways that failed roll can create interesting story opportunities. Sometimes you got exactly what you wanted, but not in the way you wanted, right? That's a failure.
That's to me, and speaking from a writing standpoint, that's the best drama. You got exactly what you wanted. Sorry about that. Right? Man. Well, let's switch gears just a little bit. So when we started talking about having you on the show, and we were talking about like, what do you want to come on the show to talk about besides gaming, which we can talk about all day, I found out there's one particular character in Young Justice that resonates with you. Who might that be?
Well, obviously, since I talked about the Young Justice comic, it would be one of those guys, right?
Sure. No.
Nope. It's Calderon.
Yes.
Aqualad. I'm an Aqualad kind of guy, man. He is just the coolest of the first season characters.
So what is it about Calder that speaks to you? Is it his personality, his dialogue, his powers? Like, unpack this for me.
To me, Calderon is great because he's the backbone of the group. He's the perfect straight man to allow all of the characters' wild antics to be interesting, but he's not the adult who's coming and putting down, like, oh, no, stop acting crazy, Kid Flash. Come on, Robin. So he can speak to them on a level that they will understand without bringing down what makes these characters exciting and young. Right. He's also a great, even though he is the leader of the team, he's so great at supporting each of them, at helping each of the members of the team be awesome, and challenging them when they need it. And that's what I love about Aqualad, about Calderon. He comes out of left field, like, who knew this guy? And he's so compelling, and he's just so powerful. Like, there's just something noble about his bearing that I really enjoyed watching.
Yeah, it's interesting because when people do a television show or do an adaptation of a comic, it's not uncommon for them to add random characters or storylines that weren't in the comic into, say, a movie or something like that. And it can work really well sometimes. Most of the time, it's a train wreck. Or at best, it's just okay, or why did you put this character in here, or why did you put this character instead of another character, right?
Like Spike in one of the X-Men animated series. Like, who's that?
Oh, yeah, exactly. You're like, there wasn't another mutant that you could have fit into this character role that somebody knew? Or, yeah, so it's weird. You wonder, like, oh, did you play in a Champions game and that was your character and you just wanted to put it in the TV show? Or, like, what's going on here? So when I first saw Aqualad, I was worried. I mean, people who listen to the show, well, people who listen to my gaming podcast know that I'm the aquatic gaming guy. Even I have a hard time with Garth, the original Aqualad.
Yeah.
The kid, he was just depressed, and he was always like, not that depression is a bad thing, but it made it so hard to get behind him, because that was like his defining character trait, was how much he didn't like, I don't know how to describe it. Not like he didn't like himself, but it's just like he never felt like he fit in. It was just a very strange character around other characters like Kid Flash and Dick Grayson and that kind of stuff. It's like they didn't know what to do with Aqualad. He just happened to be a sidekick in the 60s, so he went into the team. And so when they created this new Aqualad, I was like, okay, I don't have an issue necessarily with a new Aqualad. That's fine. I'm a little bummed just because I'm a classic Titans fan and I would have liked them just to improve Garth, but we'll see how this guy turns out, right? Also, I was like, all right, getting some diversity in the team, not a bad thing. But I hope they're not doing it just to shoehorn in diversity and have the character suck.
Yeah.
Well, pretty quickly, I was like, oh no, this guy, yes, everything. You got it all. Start checking boxes, man. Yes, diversity, we need it. Let's get this team, with some other people in it. Let's have a strong Atlantean character. Let's fight this 40, 50 year plus inertia that Aquaman sucks, which is not true in any way. Like, let's do this. I am in. And then the other things that they brought in, like the fact that his name, Calderon, is an echo of Cal Durham, and they still took this new character, and they took in the new character and didn't say, let's forget all of Aquaman. Let's forget all of this Atlantean stuff from the comics. Let's reinvent a character and have him shoehorned in. Like, let's just make this puzzle piece that doesn't fit. They didn't. They still made him fit with everything, and they put Garth in anyway, which was even extra bonus. I'm like,
I know,
yes,
I was like, well, we're just going to forget. We're going to erase all Garth and replace with Calderon and go. No, Garth's still there.
Yes, and they skip him straight to Tempest, and I'm like, yes, the strongest arc of that character's life. Let's get straight to that. Let's do that. And you still had Tula in and that kind of stuff. They managed to make her, if you include the video games, they make Tula a strong and interesting character. Like, she makes the choice of her own destiny herself. Like, she's not just fridged for terrible reasons to make Garth feel bad about himself more. Like, right. they just seem to look at all of the problems and try to fix them in a way that actually honored the character instead of just dismissed history.
Right. And they found areas to place not just Calderon within DC history, but on the team, so that he had his own niche. His personality was able to play well off of the core cast, that he had a particular function on the team, that he had his own issues to deal with as well. That's what made him compelling. It's not just that we found points to tweak the history so that he fits within the comics milieu that we're drawing from, but that he was a character that was vibrant on the series and I felt like really drove things forward from a leadership perspective and just from his general personality. I mean, the first line that the guy delivers in Independence Day is Aquaman is saying, hey, are you excited about the big day that we're hearing about? It's like, right now, my king, I'm more focused on the matter at hand.
Yes.
That is the Aquaman that I love.
The vignettes that they did at the beginning of that first episode were so great. Those in media res fights, right, with all of the ice villains were so indicative of all of their personalities, like giving us this little drop. And when we talk about in role-playing games, starting new games or campaigns and things or one-shots in media res, like right in the action, this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. Like, start it in a place where you can have the characters highlight what they do or what they can do, and so that everybody else at the table can see what is your thing, and to have you feel out what it is. And it translating to a TV show, that allows us as the watchers to get grounded in, oh, this is a very like Dick Grayson-y Robin, right? The giggling, the laughing, the acrobatics. Who is this Aqualad? Oh, as opposed to everyone else, he's like, I'm not thinking about that right now. I'm getting the job done. Yeah. Okay, this is a very well-established who this is. And also, that whole maneuver he did where Aquaman got frozen and he jumps over him and she freezes his water bearers and then he just clocks. It's just so Killer Frost. Yeah, so good. Oh, so good. Anyway, we talk about just those scenes forever. But when we were chatting ahead of time, you made some really interesting observations, and you've kind of nodded to this a little bit already. But this idea that he, both from his personality and his powers, he kind of fits in the missing piece, as opposed to a puzzle piece that gets jammed in and doesn't quite fit. He is actually the puzzle piece that fits perfectly into this group. Like you were saying, he's older, but he's not too old to be an adult and kind of talking down to the team, and he's worked with them before. But even with his powers, you had some interesting points you were making about that as well. Can you unpack that a little?
Sure. So for one thing, Aqualad has powers with water that allow him to be very flexible, right? There were so many different ways that he utilized that to entrap people, to create his swords or his mace, or to protect a great deal of people when there was a huge explosion. That flexibility was something that we didn't really see in anyone else other than Miss Martian with her shape-changing abilities.
Right.
He understood and used magic. He was the only team member that did that until Zatanna came along. He has gills, so it makes him look inhuman, which gives him a touchstone towards Miss Martian in understanding that you don't look like everyone else, but accept who you are. He had a power base that made him important where he really shined, which was underwater. His physical strength allowed him to protect the more kind of human strength level characters like Robin and Kid Flash and Artemis. Mm-hmm. So there were a lot of things that he did from a power set basis that made him fill in those missing pieces for the rest of the group.
Yeah, absolutely. And that opening scene when they first find Connor as well, in that fight, Aqualad is going toe-to-toe with Superboy. Yes, he gets beaten eventually, but he is throwing punches at Superboy and knocking him backwards, and he's taking hits, and I'm like, yes, thank you. Yeah. Like, again, with like this, the Aquaman thing, like, oh, he just talks to fish, and it's like, oh no. The dude literally fights Cthulhu every year at the bottom of the ocean to keep him down so he doesn't destroy the world. Let's get this straight, right? Like, so his strength, his speed, his durability, the way that Superboy and Blockbuster knock through the roof. There are lots of little things like, you know, Robin grabs Kid Flash, I think, and goes up with his line, but Aqualad just jumps through the hole. Yes, and lands in this cool, like, cat-like grace, right? There's just so much to love about and the way they represented him. But I just love the way that you have pointed out this idea that his personality is the balance for the group, but also his power set is a balance for the group.
It's obvious they put a great deal of thought. Like, let's not just throw in this character. Let's not tick a box. Let's create a character that helps to solidify the team, that gives them a thrust forward, that pushes our plots, that allows us to question the idiosyncrasies of characters. And, you know, I love, not just is he able to go toe-to-toe with Superboy, at least for a brief period, how does he win Superboy to their side? The choice is yours, but ask yourself, what would Superman do?
So good.
He understood in that very brief conversation with Superboy, he understood what motivated and drove him. And he then used that to save, of course, himself and Robin and Kid Flash, but also to gain an ally.
Yeah.
That's what I also love about Aqualad.
And not just gain an ally, empower an ally.
Absolutely. Because he didn't say, do this thing. He says, the choice is yours.
Yeah.
That's what makes Aqualad great.
Yeah, and this was a thing that came up when I watched it for the very first time, which was, I was like, oh, great. Dick's going to be the leader, because Dick's always the leader. That's the way it works, right? Mm-hmm. Except, and as being as huge a Dick Grayson fan as I am, I was like, wait, Dick's not going to be leader? But it didn't take very long in Drop Zone for me to realize how much sense it made. Right, this interesting thing that they pointed out about Dick, that the fact that he's the most experienced person on the team makes him the worst choice to be leader.
Right.
Because he is so, like, basically telepathic with Batman. Like they just know each other's moves. You know, like why didn't you guys disappear into the darkness like I did, right? But Aqualad is literally training with a king and a leader of men, right? It's not just like, oh, okay, I'm going to train you how to fight supervillains. I picture him like on a day-to-day basis in like the war room, you know, and helping and being there and present when Aquaman maybe can't go someplace else because he is dealing with the day-to-day lives of a continent full of people. And here's the other thing people sometimes get confused. Atlantis isn't a city. Poseidonus is the city. That's the capital of Atlantis, and Atlantis was a continent. And the continent had, depending on what era of DC Comics you're talking about, had 7 to 9 countries on it. He was the king of the continent, not just a city. So there's so much more you can do with that.
Also, Aqualad, if you recall from the Downtime episode, he attended classes, right? He learned with groups, which is another thing that, you know, Robin didn't do. He learned with Batman, right?
Right, and
keep up with Batman.
If you look in his history in the YJ Wiki and whatnot, he had when he was 12, Atlantis apparently has Atlantis. I don't know if the whole continent, but the country that Poseidonus is in, there's a mandatory military service, a 2-year mandatory military service from the age of 12. So he was literally in the Atlantean military for 2 years, as well as being the sidekick. And then, you know, now I think he's 16 in the show. So he's had 2 years of working with Aquaman. So though technically, quote unquote, Robin's been doing it the longest, and particularly against supervillains and crime specifically.
Right.
Calder is not a naive first time around the block, you know, person.
Right.
So, amazing. Actually, absolutely amazing. Okay, so speaking of that, like, you came into the show, and there's a lot of people who had read comics before and not read comics before, who came in, and like my wife adores Calder, because he's a great character.
Nice.
And she had never read a comic before that I'm aware of. Were you an Aqua family fan from the comics? It doesn't sound like you were, because
I wasn't really. I honestly wasn't. I mean, I picked up a few issues when he lost his hand. I'm like, oh, this is interesting, right? Because I knew Aquaman from Super Friends, and I really never got to like Aquaman until the Justice League animated series, where I really felt like it did him justice. Like, justice, but he was awesome. He was so awesome in that series.
It was cool. I did like him in that series. That was an era, if I remember correctly, it was in the 90s, where everything was a little grittier, and they were trying to make him a little more Namor-ish, which is Prince Namor is a Marvel character who's always been a bit of a pill. But so they definitely tried to do that with him, and I had mixed opinions about it. But I have to say, the scene in Justice League, the Justice League animated series, where he loses his hand, it is one of my favorite animated scenes ever. It almost breaks me down into tears, particularly now that I'm a dad, because it involved his son. Yeah. And in the comics, how he lost his hand was kind of whatever. Yeah. They just did it for shock value or something. But in this, it was like, oh, talk about a character driving moments. Like, who are you? What matters to you? Like, I'm not even going to tell people what happened. You go just type in Aquaman, you know, gangster Aquaman. I don't know what it pops up as, but like, I showed it to a friend of mine, one of the hosts of the Indie Apocalypse podcast, because he was mocking Aquaman, and I went on the podcast to set him straight. And he was laughing the whole time, and I sent him that video, and he was like, oh my God, it's like, that's so gangster. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know exactly what that means, but yeah, I can kind of get the idea. So go do that. Maybe we'll put a link in the show notes to that scene. Anyway, so Aqualad came to you out of nowhere, like he came to a lot of us out of nowhere, but you had no history with him, so you're taking him just as he was presented, right?
It was kind of nice because, you know, I've watched Super Friends, Justice League. I knew generally the characters that were coming in, and then here's Aqualad, this unknown figure. And that was kind of nice, right? Because he's something unexpected. He gives the DC fans who are coming from the comics world something to wonder about and try to figure out. Not just, is this, which Robin is this, but like, who the heck is this guy?
Right.
And what have they changed, and what can we expect from him? So I really enjoyed that as well, because, I knew what to expect from the other three because I'd read Young Justice, or at least I felt like I did. And of course, that turned out to be all wrong, which was awesome. But,
Right.
That was a great part about Aqualad, is that he was new and different and allowed them to try some really interesting permutations for the relationships between the team members.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with anything that you said, but I always feel like when something like this works, other creators take the wrong lessons. They're like, oh, well, Aqualad worked, we can add whoever we want to this intellectual property, and it's fine. No, Aqualad works because of a very specific way they did him, which is, what do we need to solidify this group, and how can we improve this story arc, and what is going to help us honor the heart of the character and the history of the character while also doing something new. And that's a hard thing when you're talking about like the live action DC movies, right? Wonder Woman nailed it. Nailed it, right? I have a few issues with that end fight scene that seemed a little over the top, but other than that, like, that movie was near perfection in my opinion. The other DC movies, not so much, because I don't feel like, in my personal opinion, that they got the heart of the character on the screen. I don't mind that you change things. I mean, this Dick Grayson is in no way the Dick Grayson from the comics, with certain exceptions. They kept the heart of him because he was raised in the circus. Those people died. He was raised by Bruce. And Greg Weisman even changed entirely the dynamic of why he stopped being Robin and became Nightwing. It was simply a growth and mutual respect thing, where in the comics and even the Batman animated series, it was a very confrontational split, a very heavily dramatic split, where in Young Justice, he's alluded to the idea that, no, he was just ready to move on and do his thing, and that's what Batman wanted, so he was on his side, right? That's not a comic thing. I don't have a problem with that, because it makes a better character, and it improves the character while also honoring the character. You know what I mean?
Right. And what's funny is that we, as comics fans, will try to think of these things as untouchable, but how many different permutations have we seen? How many Elseworld tales have we seen? How many different takes? Like every volume where you change writers, all of a sudden the personalities are slightly different. So if there's no 100% canon, then why not allow the television show to take the best parts of the core concepts of these characters and then mix them together and see what results, and then use all of the best parts of the IP so that you don't have to slog through 50, 30 years worth of history to get there again.
I listened to a fantastic book on tape called The Caped Crusade, The Rise of Batman and Nerd Culture. It was absolutely amazing.
I've heard of that. I haven't read it. Isn't that from, the guy, he's one of the co-hosts on an NPR show, if I remember correctly.
Oh, really? Oh, I'm not sure. I'd have to look that up. But the author reads the book, which is often a train wreck, but it was not, and he was fantastic. But he talks about a lot of this. Like, for example, a kind of core tenet of Batman these days is the idea that he's really the leader of the Justice League. Like, he's this tactician and strategian and leader of people kind of a thing in these squads, as opposed to Aquaman, who's a leader of, armies. But that aspect of Batman didn't show up until like the late 90s, mid to late 90s. So like this was not a thing when there was the Super Friends show, right? He was not the, if you go back and watch the Super Friends in the 70s, he wasn't the one making these plans, and sending people out on missions. So the character evolves and changes, which has to when you have an 85-year-old character, right? That's fine. Like, and I think a lot of comic fans really get that. I don't think it's that the characters are lightly different. It's just when it goes in direct opposition to what the character means. Like I like to say positive on the show. I have a real issue with Batman using guns and on his vehicles or anywhere else, because not using guns makes it harder, and you have to be a more interesting and better writer and creator to get Batman to solve the problem without them. Case in point, at the opening scene of... Did you see Batman Beyond?
Oh, yeah.
The animated series?
Yeah, I really liked Batman Beyond.
So good. But the opening scene of that is when Bruce Wayne's a little older and he's got a powered armored suit on he's developed that becomes part of the, part of the series. But while he's having this fight with some mobsters, he starts having a heart attack. And he loses, he's just fighting for his life at that point. And at one point, he picks a gun up and points it at one of the mobsters. And the mobster looks at him and freaks out and runs. And Bruce looks down at his hand and looks at the gun in his hand. And that's the moment. He didn't have to say anything. He's done now. And he throws the gun to the side, and then it skips ahead like 20 years. Right?
Yeah.
You don't have to say anything because that is a deep character-defining moment. That's great storytelling, too. Use it to drive the storytelling to make things more interesting, I think. And there's a reason in many cases why the characters have developed the way that they've developed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So, when did you hear about Young Justice Season 3?
Oh, gosh. I think someone reshared a post from the Whelmed, maybe I heard it from you.
Maybe?
I'm not sure. It could have been Rob Donahue on Google+. I don't know. But I remember someone had an animated GIF of when Kid Flash comes running out of the high school and does the victory dance because he's out of school. Right. That was the animated GIF I remember, and I always associate with Young Justice Season 3.
Nice. So, outstanding. And how did you feel about it?
I was blown away. I really was like, okay, maybe Aqualad cannot be a bad guy this season. That'd be awesome.
Oh, man, we didn't really get into much of that. Like, the consequences of the choices that he made in Season 2 and the way that they wrote him so that you're like, okay, I don't want him to be a villain, but if he's not a villain, then that means he has to live with all of these, alien deaths on his hands.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, it was tough. It was tough because I felt like in first season, Aqualad support character, but really he had two things. He had the downtime episode where we really got to understand where he came from. And then he had the through line of the fact that he's keeping from certain members of the group that there is a mole. There were a lot more focus points in episodes that let us learn about the other members of the group. And I kept waiting for Aqualad's second moment to shine. And that shining was he's the son of Black Manta.
Yeah.
Which is amazing and exciting. And okay, good. He's not a villain. Okay. Woo. That was my heart clenched. Yes. Okay. Superboy and Miss Martian aren't together. That's okay. But whoa, Aqualad's bad. No.
Yeah. My wife got so stressed about all of that, and like I mentioned, she's such a big fan. She was like, "No, what's happening?" I'm like, "Keep watching." She's like, "I can't. We have to pause. I'm too stressed." Yeah, which would be interesting to see. I mean, at the end of season 2, Dick says, "I'm done. I've made choices I'm not happy with. I need to have some time to my own. I'm going to go do this. The team's back to being yours again, and now Aqualad's back in a leader position." But I'm wondering how that will carry over, right?
Yeah. I mean, this is the show that will deal with the ramifications and the fallout of those choices.
Yeah.
They've shown it. Both seasons, when someone does something that is horrific or undergoes a horrific thing, like when Miss Martian kind of blows everybody's minds with this apocalypse. I can't remember the episode name, but you remember when there was the apocalypse and he pulled everybody into this mind.
Oh, failsafe. Yeah.
Yes, failsafe, right? Oh. And then they dealt with the fallout from that. So right. I'm hoping that season 3 that we have some fallout from that too. They even though he was undercover, there's still a lot of things that happened to him and because of him that they need to deal with. And I want to see how that happens. I really hope.
I agree. That's fantastic. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add before we head out of the, I would say the cave, but at this point in our reviews, the cave's blown up. So we're in the warehouse, I think.
Yeah, we'll head out of the water? I don't know, because it's not lads. We'll keep that theming.
Head out of Atlantis. Yeah, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I'm so excited for season 3. I'm really happy that we can revisit these characters, and I think that Whelmed was a part of that. So I'm really thankful for this show, because I think you guys did a great job of getting the word out and making sure that people kept binging YJ. So thanks.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. To put credit where credit's due, I definitely was talking a lot on social media about Young Justice as part of that, and we started the podcast to be a driving factor toward that season 3. But that announcement happened within, I think, our 3rd episode. So I can't.
That's interesting because of the delayed taping. I think there were more episodes.
Oh no, we definitely had a lot of episodes in the can. We started with like 14 or 16 episodes in the can before we started airing.
Right.
And so, yeah, there's a big delay where we're talking about, we hope we get a season 3, and we even cut some conversations, actually, because the announcement had been made. Yeah, so we do appreciate that, and I think Caleb and I were definitely like pushing it on social media and hope that had something to do with it. But I really think that like the Young Justice Needs a Season 3 Facebook group that's like 500,000 people, and
yeah, that doesn't hurt.
The YJ Wiki people, and then all the people all the fans that really drove this had a lot to do with it. And I'm glad that we're here now so people can get a little more in-depth view and get prepped for season 3. But I'm happy to say I'm not sure they needed our podcast to get the season, but I'm glad we can contribute to boosting the signal.
Exactly.
All right, man. Thanks so much for spending time with us in the warehouse, Rich. Oh, God, so weird to say. Where can people find you out here on Earth Prime?
Best way to find me is on Google Plus, where I'll be talking about the Gauntlet Con, and all my podcasts. I'm also ORKLORD on Twitter. Yes, that's Orc Lord, not Oak Lord, but Orc Lord, ORKLORD. I don't post as much on Twitter as I do on Google Plus. Then also have a YouTube channel where I post up a lot of the games that I run over Hangout. So if you want to see me running a bunch of PbtA games, curious about that, there's like 15 sessions of Masks called Masks High School, which is stellar and very much worth watching.
Outstanding. We will definitely have links for all of this stuff in the show notes too. So link on over to that.
Thanks.
If you enjoy our show, please consider sharing with a friend. You can also support the show by giving us a 5-star review on iTunes or your podcatcher of choice. Those ratings really do help others find the show. If you do leave us a rating or review, please let us know, especially if you're outside the U.S. We have to look a little harder to find those. And even though Season 3 has been officially announced, please continue to spread the word to friends and family about the series. #BuyYJComics on Comixology to help us get more stories sooner, and get yourself up to speed for the Season 3 premiere. And as always,
stay whelmed, everyone.
You've been listening to Whelmed, the Young Justice Files podcast. Our hosts are Rich Howard and Emily Booza. Our editor and producer is Neal Powell. Our theme was composed by Emily Mio. Our logo was created by Kevin Bates. Whelmed is a fan-made podcast and is not officially affiliated with DC Comics, DC Entertainment, Warner Brothers Animation, and any other owners of Young Justice or its related source material. As such, these companies have sole ownership of all symbols, images, names, logos, and proprietary material related to Young Justice. Original content of this podcast is ours under Creative Commons. Thanks for listening, and stay whelmed.